Professor Sökefeld, thank you very much for agreeing to have an interview with us. Could you please first introduce yourself and answer our question how your research relates to Crossroads Asia network?
Mm-hmm. I'm a social anthropologist at the University of Munich, and there I'm mostly engaged in research in Pakistan in a variety of fields, like we do research on natural disasters and their political entanglements, but also on gender and mobile phones, just to mention two projects that are still going on. And well, I'm working in Pakistan, but I have to say in advance that I never see myself as an area student. So anthropology is not an area studies discipline, although we do research in areas, but of course within the context of anthropological theory, which relates to all kinds of human forms of culture and society. But of course it's very important, especially because of our tradition of fieldwork methods, or the methodology really to base your research in particular places, working with particular people in specific networks, that we have a good knowledge and good relations within an area. So I think this is a very important part, but on the other hand, we bring this theoretical background with it, which is not really limited or glued to particular areas. And I think from this perspective, anthropology in a way foreshadowed what we also discussed within the Crossroads area networks, in the sense that we have to break up these container ideas about what is an area and how should we look across, follow the people, instead of only being content with working within one somehow preconceived area.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. And the second question is, what is the relevance of the concept of the state to Crossroads?
Mm-hmm. I think generally the question has to be, what is the relevance of the state to social life in the current state of the world? Within the Crossroads project, we were quite we wanted to focus not too much on the state, because in the beginning we considered the state as another kind of container. So we didn't want to have the area as a container limiting our research interest. So we also didn't want to focus on the state as another container just beside the area, which might limit our research interest in a kind of state methodological nationalism or statism or things like that. But I think the state is very different from an area, because the area is largely an academic concept which might structure institutions, for instance, in the German landscape of universities, while the state has a life of its own. I mean, it's a real center of power, which is not necessarily centrally organized, but which relates to many, many areas of the lives of the people we work with. So actually we can't do without taking the state into account. And I think if we continue with this perspective on figurations, which guides our research, the state is part of many, many figurations. And I think the significance for Crossroads studies is not to focus on a particular state and regard it in the traditional way as a kind of unified institution, somehow opposed to society or above society, but as a multiply entangled kind of, perhaps not even thing, but processes, which has many, many influences on the lives of the people we work with. And of course, they also have influences of what happens within what is called the state. So in a way, we have to, perhaps 20 years ago, we would have said we have to deconstruct the state. Now perhaps we can say we have to figurationalize the state, or I don't know, or we should call this, but to view the state as interwoven with the social relations and the power relations and the things which are at the center of our very projects.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And the last question is, since you have been involved with Crossroads Asia network, you have the idea of area studies and how it developed. Considering this context of the conference and its theme, how do you envision the future of area studies?
I mean, there are probably different futures to be discussed. On the one hand, there's this institutional question: where will the funding come from? Is it a kind of dying branch in the academia? And I think that's not the case. So in this sense, I think also perhaps as a consequence of this funding initiative by the German Ministry of Research and Education, area studies are quite striving. But I think this is not enough to think about the future of area studies. But what we did so much within the Crossroads network is to ask what, let's say, academic, scientific, theoretical work does this concept of areas actually do? And I think there we should, or more work has to be done in the way of questioning these traditional boundaries, both in the institutional way. So for instance, I could be somebody in South Asian studies, so I'm not interested in what people in Central Asian studies do. That's completely wrong, I think. And also in the sense of the fields, the actual places where we work, because there the people actually have these connections across all kinds of things which we might regard as barriers, like the mountain separating Central area from South Asia. They don't really separate people, but they all form linkages and enable relations, movements and processes across, and I think we have to continue to focus on these interconnections.
Okay. Thank you very much for your contribution.
Thank you very much.